Every once in a while, you record an episode where you think, I'm going to want to have a conversation with this person for years to come. Today was one of those shows. I enjoyed my conversation with Ryan Hawk, speaker, host of the Learning Leader Show podcast, and creator of the Learning Leader Academy. Forbes called the Learning Leader Show the most dynamic leadership podcast around. Ryan is the author of 2 books, and he's joined us today to discuss his latest book, The Pursuit of Excellence, The Uncommon Behaviors of the World's Most Productive Achievers, where Ryan shares the stories of the most productive achievers so you can implement the best of what others have learned. I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. Ryan, welcome to the Growth Guide podcast. Where I'd love to start is if you could introduce our readers a bit to yourself in case they don't know you yet.
Thanks, Clint. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm guessing you reached out initially based on combination of my work with my podcast. It's called The Learning Leader Show. I've done that for the past 8.5 years. And since then, I've published a few books. First one called Welcome to Management. Second one called The Pursuit of Excellence. And really, I think my purpose is to try and inspire others to value and pursue excellence in their own lives, to get out of the world of comparison of others and really focus on your inner scorecard, the one of improvement, of comparing yourself only to your previous self. And I try to follow my own curiosities with great rigor and reach out to people and ask to speak with them and record those conversations, hopefully for the betterment of myself, as well as all those who choose to follow along. So I've had a lot of fun, man. I'm a big believer in that. I don't think it's any point in doing this stuff if it's not fun. But those are the things I do for work. There's plenty more in the backstory, but I'm guessing we can get there if you want.
Well, hopefully we'll cover some of that off in the conversation. And the pursuit of excellence is what we're going to talk about today. The first thing that jumps out at me in the pursuit of excellence is surrounding ourselves with great leaders. And 2 people that you talk about, mentors in your life, are Bob Gregg and Ron Ullery. Can you share with the listeners, who are they and how have they impacted your life to where you are today?
Coach Bob Gregg was the head football coach at Centerville High School for more than 30 years. He's a legend. He's in our Hall of Fame. I was fortunate to be a part of the team that helped him win his 300th game, which is an incredible feat for a high school coach since you only played 10 games per year. Coach Ron Ullery was our offensive coordinator, who then went on to become the head coach when Coach Gregg retired after my senior season. I share them because I think I learned everything about leadership initially from them. Other than my mom and my dad and my 2 brothers, Coach Ullery and Coach Gregg are probably the most important people in my life as far as the ones in my formative years who made such a difference. They taught me what it means to work. They taught me what it means to have resilience. They taught me what it means to be overly prepared. They taught me what it means to have attention to detail, note-taking. They showed us that we gained confidence because our leaders we knew would be the most prepared people on the field every Friday night. They also taught me that most of the greatest things in life follow really tough moments. And so if we wanted to be excellent on Friday nights in October, well, then we're going to work really hard in January and February and March. And those June and July and August workouts starting at 4:15 in the morning were going to be absolutely brutal. And so when I think about any of the work I do today, that if I want it to be excellent, it takes an immense amount of work leading up to these big moments. And now that's what my life is a series of big moments and a series of getting ready for those moments, whether it's a keynote speech, a podcast, writing books, helping with senior leaders in an advisory capacity. All of that preparation and detail orientation and care and love and just an immense amount of work, it goes into all of those things. So I learned that luckily when I was an 8th grader going into my freshman season at Centerville High School.
Wow. How does that speak to you, to the power of sport in our children's lives and how it transcends more than just clearly the playing field?
I'm very biased, and I realize there are other ways, but especially when you grow up and if your parents have the means to be able to give you and provide you with anything, it could be easy. Life's not necessarily easy, but it can be made easier the great thing about sports is they don't care about where you come from, who your parents are, who your siblings are. All that matters is what happens between those lines. And so there's so much to be learned from losing, from getting knocked down, from getting beat out by the other person for the starting quarterback job. There's so much you can learn through sports. And so I love what it can provide. I love what it's currently providing for my children. I love seeing them embrace sports and the work that goes into it. And so I'm just a big believer in, I don't know if I'd call it manufacturing hardship, but when we're able to provide them with pretty much anything and anything they could ever want, we need to do our best to manufacture hardship in their lives. And I think sports is one of the great ways we can do that.
How old are your kids, Ryan?
The oldest is 16, and then the youngest is 8.
16 and 8. Yeah, great years for sports. So I have a 15-year-old, as of next month, 15-year-old and 11-year-old boy, and absolutely align. It's a totally different lifestyle growing up than we were afforded, or at least I was afforded growing up. And so the only spot where I can see that we can push them is on the basketball court, on the football field, in the gym. So love that response. And something that I try to reinforce with them that I didn't realize was Darren Hardy's formula was a question I want you to be able to take the listeners through, is the idea of the compound effect being small, smart choices plus consistency plus times equals radical difference. Can you break down for the listeners what that looks like and how they can be using that in their lives in the pursuit of excellence?
One of the number one questions I get at the end of a keynote speech is usually around hacks or what's a quick fix or something I could implement immediately that will change my life. And my answer is usually disappointing for the members of the audience, because I've learned that there really aren't any. The compound effect is about consistently doing the work each and every day and then watch compounding happen. James Clear writes about this in Atomic Habits. We just recorded again about this, but it's that incremental work, and then that can compound. So we're trying, I'm trying to create a visual for people to think of yourself on this trajectory. And if we do the necessary work each day, whatever that may be, like write the page a day, go to the gym every single day, get the sugar out of that, whatever the thing is for you, but you consistently show up and do that every single day, that compounding effect then creates this upward trajectory where the behaviors compound on one another, just like compound interest with your money, right? That's what Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger talk about all the time. How to get rich really slowly. It just takes a while. Don't interrupt the power of compounding. The same thing with money is the same thing with our habits, with our daily behaviors. It's why consistency and reliability and dependability, very important and very unsexy qualities in a person. However, the ones who are sustaining excellence over an extended period of time seem to all embody those. And that's just not as enjoyable to hear, because there is no hack, there is no quick fix. It just takes time and effort and consistently doing it. The interesting thing about that, though, Clint, is the fact that most people can't or won't do that. They're not willing to. They're willing to for a short period of time. They get on the new diet, and then once the diet term length is over, they go back to their old bad habits, as opposed to saying, what system could I implement that I could do forever? That's what I would urge people to. If you want to be a writer, well, then you need to write every day. If you want to get in shape, you have to watch what we eat, not a diet, but we actually watch what we eat, and we go to the gym every day, or we go on our walks, or whatever it may be. Whatever the person that you're trying to become is, what system are you willing to put in place and adhere to each and every day in order to become that person and then get better and better and better. Again, it's not as fun, it's not as quick, it's not as sexy, but to me, it seems to be a commonality among those who sustain excellence over time.
And one thing, tying it back to sports earlier, is a lot of people may have this fear of, but I won't be good when I start. And I'm not seeing results early on. What we're looking for, though, is being willing to embrace the suck, if you will. I'm going to be okay until I'm good. I'm going to be good long enough, consistently enough to become great. You talk about the importance of focusing on that process over the results. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think it's a superpower to be okay to suck at something initially. I've recently started playing pickleball. I still don't fully know the rules. I'm not very good at it. I'm getting beat by people who are far less athletic than I am, but it's okay. I'm not embarrassed by it. I think that's part of the deal. When I look at people, again, who sustain excellence over time, they've gotten rid of the fear of looking stupid initially, whether they're trying to learn a new instrument, they're participating in a new activity or game that they have never played before. They're doing improv, right? I've learned a lot from doing improv and seeing how people show up for that. All of those things, like, you're not going to be very good at it. And I think if you can develop the skill, a beginner's mindset, knowing that at the beginning of anything, you're probably not very good, and being okay with that, that in itself is a superpower, because then whatever the thing is that you're showing up to do that you're new and not good at, knowing, hey, I am willing to ask questions. I'm willing to get repetitions. I'm willing to be embarrassed. I'm willing to look a little bit stupid initially. I'm willing to get beat by somebody who isn't as athletic as I am, like whatever that thing may be. I think having that, and then the willingness to keep going and keep going. And eventually you do get better and you see the results of that. But if you're too afraid to look stupid initially, you'll just stay in your little hole of things that you're currently good at and never really expand. And again, I don't think that's a really fun way to live. I'd rather go out than say it's okay to look kind of dumb initially. That's all right. And maybe too, you try things, you're like, yeah, that's not for me. I don't want to do that. But you don't know until you go and do it. It's like anything else. People say, oh, I want to be able to get up on stage and give speeches like I've seen you do online. Well, the only way to do that is to get up on any sort of a stage and to do it. And I promise you, when you're brand new, you're not going to be good at it because it's really hard. And I think the fear, though, of looking stupid or being embarrassed, unfortunately paralyzes people, and they don't expand their kind of current zone. And to me, I think those people, I look for the ones who are pushing their edges on constantly, even if initially they look dumb. In a way, I really admire seeing somebody who, it is obvious they don't know what they're doing, they're not good at it, and they're completely fine with that. Now they're going to ask questions, they're going to try to get better, they're going to do it again and again and again. That to me is like, I want a person like that on my team, or I'm going to follow a person like that if they're a leader in my organization.
We're jumping really far ahead in the book, and so I will come backwards and explain a bit more to people. But when you hit something there that I really love zoning in on, is the idea of the beginner's mindset. Because you later contrast, we have beginners, we have experts, and then we have masters. And when we're looking for mastery, we still have that beginner's mindset, even when we're far along in our journey. So we're asking the questions, we're digging in. What does that look like? For example, you mentioned a Warren Buffett or a Charlie Munger, people who you might think are at the pinnacle, but they're still so curious to learn even more and have that beginner's mindset. What does that look like for people to develop and bring into their life?
Charlie Munger talks about becoming a learning machine, right? The biggest difference between people who seem to, I'll say, sustain excellence, he'll use other words maybe, but over time, is the fact that they turn themselves into learning machines. And I think there's a simple prompt you could ask yourself is at the end of each day is, what did I do today to be a little bit wiser going to bed than I was when I woke up? Who did I talk to? What books did I read? What TED Talks did I watch? What podcasts did I listen to? What class did I teach? Because I think teaching is a great way to learn. What did I do today to be a little bit wiser going to bed than I was when I woke up? And if you can stack those days consistently, day after day after day, by following your curiosity with great rigor, asking questions, being a great listener, asking better follow-up questions than initial ones, right? Just like you're doing right now. That, to me, if you continuously stack those days, you'll notice you'll be in a much better place a year from now. So, Clint, when you listen to your podcast 1 year from now and you listen back to old episodes, I would hope that you'll be embarrassed. You should say, man, I can't believe I was that bad a year ago. That proves to me that you've grown, you've gotten better. Even if you've done it for 20 years, you should be better your 20th year than you were your 19th year. I think your previous and past work, if you reread the writing or you look at the videos or listen to the podcast or you watch yourself speak on stage, God, I do this from time to time. Like, what? They paid me for that? That was horrible, right? When I look at one from a couple years ago, and I thought it was good at the time. So I think that's a good signal and a marker for growth, that if we look at our old stuff, we're a bit embarrassed yeah, some of it's good, but some of it's terrible. And I think one of the ways to have that happen is to ask yourself that question: what did I do today to be little bit wiser than I was going to bed than when I woke up? And being able to answer in the affirmative day after day after day, and let compounding take over. But that takes thought and intention. And those are two other qualities that I found to be a commonality among those who sustain excellence, is the fact that they're very thoughtful and they're very intentional. They think about things. They're reflective. They're pausing from time to time. They use silence. And then when they decide to act, there isn't just wandering around, crossing our fingers, hoping for the best. They act with intention. They do it because they have thought it through. They have talked to people. And then once they decide, they go, versus just kind of like, oh, let's see what happens, hope for the best. Oh, I'm not really thinking about it because maybe that's hard or it takes too much time. No, it's like put a lot of thought. And then after that, put a lot of intention with your actions. I think that's a big key.
Absolutely 100% on all of that. So much to dive in and chew on, Ryan. And I can even see when you say you've been doing this for 8.5 years, your ability to use pauses, enunciate words, clarity of how you're speaking. It's so clear that you've been on this journey for that period of time. And I'm sure when you look back and say, what were my first podcast interviews like? There's dramatic change from then to now. And I already feel it after a year. And you'll recognize when I started this journey, I knew that podcasting wouldn't be easy and the results wouldn't come fast. And what I said to myself was, you have to give it until episode 100 before you even assess yourself. Get better every day, generally for me in all areas of my life. And the key is what you said there, thought and intention. Mm-hmm. Intentionally, what am I going to focus on? But don't assess yourself until you're at least 100 episodes in, and then understand, how has that change worked and how has it grown? Have I seen the results? But so many people stop because they don't have those results. And sorry, total digression. I'm going to take it back for a second to your book. And what I want to cover for the listeners at a high level is you talk about 3 broad buckets that we're going to look at, which are the build, the fuel, and the chase. Can you take us through those at a high level? And then we'll dive into some of the parts of each one. And then we'll leave the listener to go find the rest in the book.
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, I think we're always in the building phase. We're always working on ourselves. You can't lead anybody else until you lead yourself. My first book, Welcome to Management, was lead yourself, build your team, lead your team. And this second book was entirely focused on the leading yourself element. So there's a build. The fuel is like where the drive comes from. Where's the purpose? Why are you doing what you're doing? I think it's important to acknowledge that, to think about that, to understand that, right? And the chase is just the daily action. We can't just be the learner who sits in the corner and takes a lot of notes and reads books, but then doesn't do anything. We have to take that learning from theory to action, right? We learn who we are in practice, not in theory. That's what Herminia Ibarra said. And I'm a big believer in that, because sometimes that can be a problem for me, where I am very curious and I want to learn and I'm taking a bunch of notes and I'm reading a lot of books. Well, in a way, it's I wouldn't say it's useless, but it kind of is if we're not doing anything with it. So I think it's just important to push people that we mostly learn from doing. And I played football growing up, all sports, but played football in high school and college and after college for a little bit. And I know the differences between when I was on the field playing versus when I was watching somebody else play. Yeah, I could watch film, I could see what they did well, we could have conversations, but it's a completely different ballgame when you're actually taking the snap from the center, having to stand in the pocket while 300-pounders are trying to kill you and make the throw. That's completely different than watching somebody else do it. And I think that's the case with pretty much everything that we're doing. Maybe not to that extreme, but for the most part, if we really want to learn, we got to put it into practice.
That super resonates right in this moment. Last night, my son, who's about to turn 12, said, I was watching Succession while doing some writing later at night, and he said, Dad, do you believe in manifestation? And so I said, well, come on over here, grab my notebook over there and come sit down with me. And I took him through the notebook and showed him all the writing that I do, Ryan, that shows here's where I'm going to be in 2025. Mission 2025, what life's going to look like, how I'm going to get there. I do a little bit of the Dilbert idea of, have a goal, write it down 20 times a day, and then you start to really think about it. But what I really emphasized with him was, son, everyone will tell you about, they call manifestation the law of attraction. The problem is the law of attraction doesn't actually work unless it's combined with the law of action. And that's what I'm hearing from you as well, is you can't get what you want simply by wanting it. You have to get onto the field and play every day to get there. So the goal is important, but you have to bring it back to, what do I need to be doing today to get to that goal tomorrow? What does that look like for you in your life?
Well, I'm actually curious to ask you, because I was digging into all your work ahead of time. Then let's say, for example, at one point you probably said, or maybe you didn't, maybe you stumbled into it, but I'd be curious to hear. I would love to have 100,000 followers on Twitter, because I think it's a great medium to influence and impact people, and it could be good for brand building, all that other stuff too. So saying that is great. We all could say that, but then actually getting there and then tripling that, or wherever you're at right now, is really hard to do. So I'm curious, like, did you actually do that? Did you set a goal like that? And then what did you do to achieve whatever that first goal was, and then compound on that?
It's legitimately everything in your book. I found it a masterwork. So I'll take a step backwards. For me, everything comes down to, similar to you, what I've read in the past. And a few key things for me have always been, begin with the end in mind and the flywheel. Those are two big drivers of my life, and the compound effect. So you'll start to see the three of those play in that plan. So what I did was I said, I want to have a successful podcast. I want to transition from a CFO to someone who writes podcasts, public speaks, coaches and consults, private equity, real estate investing. And I created a plan in 2020 to be doing that by a certain point in time. And when I looked at my list, I created a list that said, for each of these categories, where do I want to be in each category? What do I need to be doing to achieve that? And what education requirements, if any, do I need? And then I brought it all the way back to today and said, if that's my goal 5 to 10 years from now, what do I need to be doing today to get there? And the one that jumped out for me was build a brand. It was in every single one of those buckets. And so I started on social media, and I said, I realized pretty quickly with the podcast, it's very hard to reach out to you, Ryan, when I have 100 followers and say, Ryan, would you like to come on the podcast? And I'll share this with my mom and my brother and sister. Versus, Ryan, would you like to come on and I'll share this to 300,000 people plus a newsletter with 10,000 people? So the idea I realized quickly was that if I increase the growth of social media, I can reach out to more people for the podcast. If I have conversations with someone like Ryan on the podcast, I can write about that on social media and people will be more interested, which will start to fuel each other. So when I started, I said, well, the first goal is I need to be able to get to this many listens and reach out to these people. So I need to get the social media to this level. And then the question became, how do I do that? And so the answer was, I'm going to learn. I'm going to look at the people ahead of me who've done it. I took probably 3 or 4 courses and I put in the reps. So last April, I started writing threads. I took Ship 30 for 30 with Dickie Bush and Nicholas Cole and wrote a thread every single day for 75 days.
So hold on that point. So there's something about quality and quantity and consistency. I've actually had a long conversation with Jason Gaynard about this, because when he had his podcast, he actually said, like, well, consistency doesn't matter as long as the quality is top notch. And to a point, what I said is I think you need both. I think it needs to be very high quality, and very consistency builds routines for people. It builds trust. It lets them know you're going to be there. You're going to show up for them. So like, that's why 8.5 years, every Sunday, 7:00 Eastern, my podcast is shipping no matter what, right? No matter how much travel or how much COVID, it doesn't matter. Like, it's coming. So 75 days, a thread a day. How did you maintain high, because anybody can write threads, but not anybody can write great threads. How do you maintain high quality for all 75 of those? And you're still doing it, right? Not every day, but how did you still you maintain high quality for 75 days?
And not all of them were high quality. And realistically, to begin with, they were low quality because I was learning. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier is I'm willing to embrace the suck
Yeah.
for long periods of time. I
Hmm.
know I'm not going to be good at things. And so I do them anyway. I say, I will suck until I'm good. I will be good until I'm great. And in there was some repurposing. So one of the things we talk about in socials is when you have a thread, 3 months later, if you're growing by a certain percentage, you have an entirely new audience. So you can reshare what you wrote 3 months ago. The bigger you get, the longer those gaps between reshares can be. And so there was a certain amount of resharing in there. And early on, I'd be willing to do, here are the top 10 movies everybody should watch. And I would put some thought into it. It would have the movie, some lessons from it, sports movies. You should watch The Blind Side. Here's what you'll learn. And over time, I was less willing to do that superficial. And you're not going to be surprised. The more you did it, the better the quality automatically became because
So
you start to train your brain
yeah. So
to
you
write a
basically
certain way.
said to yourself, though, I'm doing this, right? You made the choice and then you followed through on the promise you made to yourself.
Yeah. And this for me started at 32 when a lot of people, we live our life in our head.
Yeah.
And you talk about this, you get the dopamine rush of you talk about doing something, but you don't do it. And around 32 was when I went from talking about doing things to doing things. And the first one was an Ironman. And that was the first time I took Stephen Covey and said, okay, I was fat and out of shape, a couch potato. And I said, I'm going to do an Ironman. It took 2 years and we did it. And I always use we because I can't do Twitter. I can't do this podcast. I can't do the Ironman unless I have that partner who's supporting the journey. And so that was the first time bringing it all the way back to saying, well, if we're going to get there, what do we need to do today to get there? And let's start. And let's do that consistent, steady march. And once you do that, and this is why even our conversation on sport, and I'm going to get back to your book. You're very good at turning the table here. The idea that doing that Ironman taught me any goal you have, you simply have to bring it back to today and say, what do I need to do every day over a long period of time, starting small, which is something you talk about, and we can dive into that for the listener. What's that first step I need to take? If you're going to do an Ironman, you don't need to go run a marathon tomorrow. You need to buy a pair of running shoes, get your bike tuned up, and take some swimming lessons. That's step one. And then we're going to work our way up to that over a long period of time. And when you do that with that, you realize, well, wait, I can do that with a Twitter following. I can do that with building a business. I can do that with becoming a CFO. I can do that with becoming a leader in a company. Anything I want is achievable if I break it down into its smallest component steps and I learn along the way and I just show it. And this is why I love what you wrote. And it's a masterclass. If I show up every day and I do the work.
Yeah. So you were a CFO and you decided to peace out on that. Like, I don't want to do that anymore.
No, I'm still a CFO.
Oh, you
So
are?
I'm
Okay.
I'm a CFO by day. Run a finance team with about 33 people. And by night, I create content and on the weekends.
And they're cool with that?
They're less cool with that over time, Ryan.
Are you going to come to the point where you have to make that call or what?
Yeah, I'm fine doing both as long as feasibly possible. And I recognize at some point, and it's probably starting to tear at the edges, that you grow a little too much on social media and things become a little too popular and people become unhappy with that. The thing I always come back to is, to the extent it's not getting in the way of what you're doing, the focus is still on my role as a CFO and making sure I'm doing my job and we're performing. But it becomes a distraction for other people.
I personally thought it helped. I was a VP of sales at a big, huge company. And the podcast element started becoming, in some people's minds, a distraction. I actually got hired by a boss who loved it. He was all about it, but eventually he moved on, and I got a different boss who wasn't as big of a fan of the quote distraction, even though I felt it made me a better leader within an organization. So it's nice if you can work with people who see it as a feature, not a bug. I'm guessing all of your work, all of your writing, all of your podcasting makes you a better leader and makes you a better CFO. And hopefully people are open-minded enough to see that having Clint is a real asset. Let's not do anything to make him just want to leave and do that work full time. Because you're also going to be, I liked the fact that it was a side hustle for 3.5 years because there was no pressure to make a single dollar. And when you're not focused on having to make money, you're focusing on just doing great work and not thinking, well, how do I monetize this thing as fast as possible? As opposed to saying, no, I'm just focused on the work. Because to me, I don't know about you, the podcasting part is the reward. I mean, it's the reward for this, for me, is that I just get to keep doing it. Right. I love recording podcasts. I love writing. I mean, there are days I don't love writing, but I love kind of what it does for me, the person it helps me become. And I think it's great for people to have these side interest and pursuits. And I think companies, they'd be better off. And I think they probably are getting better at this because they understand the power of the internet and writing online and all the things podcasting. They'd say, hey, let's not call these distractions. Let's say this is great. Now, you do have to do the work, right? You got to make sure you're as a CFO, you're doing excellent work. Those are table stakes, but I think we should highlight and reward people who do the type of thing you're doing, not slowly push them out the door.
If I look at your example, I would imagine that as a leader in sales, the way you're able to listen, the way you're asking questions, the way you're getting someone to open up and tell you how they feel, what they want, their desires, that's a massively powerful tool that you may not have had before you started the podcast. Would that make sense to you?
100%. 100%. Helps you in your personal life. I mean, aren't you a better husband and dad by being a better listener, by following your curiosity, by understanding people and emotion? Your emotional intelligence gets better every single interview that you do, every conversation that you have. I think I've noticed, my wife talks about this all the time. I've noticed a giant difference socially, just with friends, with random parents on the soccer field, right? Of kind of connecting and building relationships with people. All of those things get better. And it definitely makes you better as a sales professional. I mean, in sales, I think the people who are the best, they understand that there's a current state and there's a desired state, right? That's the sales process. And through the process of discovery, which is what we'd call it in our sales world, you are trying to figure out the gap between the current state and the desired state. And the best way to create that big gap is to ask questions, to listen, to be thoughtful, to figure out where they're at and to figure out where they want to go. And the only way to know where they're at and to know where they want to go is to learn from them, is to ask them questions. And so while I'm doing that as a sales professional and then teaching others to do the same, I'm professionally doing that, or I was, on the side by asking all these really wise people a bunch of questions and learning from them. So yeah, I think the act of having pointed, intentional conversations with people who are wiser than you, I see all upside. I just don't see any downside for people doing that. If someone said, yeah, I have this practice, or what I do in my off hours, in addition to my family time, but what I do in my off hours is I go talk to people who are a lot smarter than me, who have different life experiences from me, and I ask them a bunch of questions, and I try to synthesize their learning so I help other people as well along the way. I would say, yeah, I'd like Clint to be in my organization. I don't even care what job it is. I'd like that person to be in my organization. I want a team full of people like that. I'm guessing good things will happen if people approach their days, as opposed to saying, oh, I'm pretty tired. I'm just going to go watch TV when I'm done. I mean, I get it. We all need to rest. We need to recharge. We need to relax. Stress plus rest equals growth. I get that. I've had Brad Stolberg on, right? We talked about those things. But to me, I think it's a huge feature to have people in your organization who are just striving to get better, and they have an intentional process in place to help them do that.
And how do you look for people like that? Because you do talk about this, that when you're building a culture or you're pursuing excellence, is finding people who have that curiosity. So when you're building a team or you're looking for someone to add to your team, how do you look for that curiosity element in people?
Well, a couple ways. One, it's how they behave, and two, it's for questions I ask. So the questions I'm asking them about what they're into, what they like, what drives them, what they're most curious about. I think it's a great question. What are you most curious about right now? What are you most excited about right now? What are some times in the past you were? What happened as a result? And then the initial questions are just they're just to get it kicked off. Then you have to be a good listener and ask great follow-up questions based on what they say. So I think that's important. The other thing I've noticed, and we ran this little study because I was interviewing and hiring salespeople for a long time, then eventually sales managers. So I was fortunate to hire lots of them over the course of my 12-year corporate career, and I found the ones who ended up doing the best, having the best results, being the best mentors, being great teammates. They were the ones who both had the confidence and the curiosity to ask me questions throughout the process as opposed to just waiting till the end. So think about the typical interview. You come in, you want this job, and they ask you questions and you answer them. And at the end of the hour or whatever, they say, "What questions do you have for me?" And then that person kind of opens up their notebook. They look at their prepared questions and they ask. That is like a C or a B minus versus the candidate who comes in and it immediately shifts to a conversation and not an interview because they're interviewing me just as much as I'm interviewing them because they probably have options. They probably have multiple
Mm.
companies and multiple people who want them. So, because of that, they're going to be interviewing me to see, should I come to work here? It's not like I'm just trying to get the job. It's I'm seeing if this is the right place for me to go. And by doing that, that takes confidence, that takes preparation, and that takes curiosity. All great skills, at least in the sales profession, but probably most jobs, to be confident, to be curious, right? To have some courage. All those things are good qualities in people. And so that little thing, which I would always note after every interview, it wasn't foolproof, it wasn't 100%. I haven't found any rule that is. There are certainly exceptions to the rule. But when I found those people and then we put them in our culture, in our organization, more often than not, they did really well.
And when you look at yourself, the curiosity, the passion for learning, for asking questions and growing through doing that, did you always have that? Or how did that develop over time? And how did your podcast help to facilitate that as part of your journey?
No, it's not something ingrained in me. It's not something I had for a long, long time. I mean, as a football player in college and afterwards, I just kind of did whatever the coach told me to do. I wasn't a book reader. I wasn't even big on meeting with mentors. This is a regret. I think it was a mistake. I was immature, like a lot of kids, although now I meet college kids and they are way ahead of me. But no, I think what happened, it's funny. I got in the corporate world and I got really lucky. I got a sales job at a company called Lexis Nexus. And I was fortunate that one, just to get the job, a family friend had to kind of take a shot on me. And I don't think he would have if he wasn't friends with my dad, which I was super lucky to get the opportunity. But I also, I really wanted to prove him right. I had people come to me and offer to help me. I tried to show up with an open mind, with a desire to be hungry and try to get better and learn. And so I would come in at all hours on the weekends, do whatever we have to do to learn. And so I learned by asking questions of these mentors who were helping me, who were doing it just because they're good people. Wow, this is actually kind of a superpower in itself that I hadn't really tapped into prior to then. Then I started reading books. I remember reading Good to Great by Jim Collins and
Ah, such
Give
a
and
good
Take
book.
by Adam Grant, and so these books, and I realized I'm kind of amazed and slightly embarrassed that I didn't realize that there's so much value you can gain from simply reading books. I mean, it sounds basic to say that, but there's so much you can learn. And so one book then led to the next and the next and the next, and one conversation led to the next and the next. And I love the interview process when I worked in sales. I love kind of learning about people and their stories. And then do we take a shot or not? Like, I love that. And so I started my podcast after I finished my MBA because my official schooling was now ending. And I wanted to create a different version of my own school to create my own form of a leadership PhD program to follow my own curiosity, where I get to pick all of my teachers. When you get your MBA, I don't know, I think you got some of the certifications. You don't get to choose the curriculum. The university says, here, take these classes. It's only offered by this one teacher at this time. Go do that. And sometimes you get lucky and it's great. And sometimes it really sucks. And I thought, I'd rather create my own school where I'm choosing the topics and I'm choosing the professors. And if you choose to learn in public or you choose to create a platform as you've done, your odds of attracting higher caliber professors, podcast guests in this case, go up. And one leads to the next. And so to me, like, all of those things started happening. All of those started happening. And I realized this kind of being curious thing is pretty good. This kind of reading thing is kind of good. This talking to people and asking them questions and being a good listener and asking better follow-up questions was pretty cool. And would I wish I would have learned that when I was 16 instead of 27? Yeah, that would have been great. But hey, better late than never. So in a way, it proves, like, definitely not born with it, definitely not in my DNA or my makeup. Maybe it was, it just needed something to bring it out, but it didn't come out for a pretty long time.
Even though you're saying you started late and you regret not starting earlier, you mentioned having the podcast for 8 years now and shipping every Sunday, which would put you reasonably early in podcasting parlance. And something that jumps out at me is publishing every Sunday for 8 years. There's a level of focus and discipline that goes into that. And you probably learned some of that as a quarterback on the gridiron. What does that focus and discipline mean to you in the pursuit of excellence? And how does your concept of the wall tie into that?
So the Michael Phelps story, right, is the wall, right? If you watch him in the Olympics, when swimming, there's this amazing picture that was taken in the middle of his butterfly stroke. The guy who was supposed to win or favored to win that race, they made the turn, they come back. Phelps was losing, and they make the turn. He comes back, he gets ahead of his competitor, and the picture is Michael Phelps is squarely focused on getting to that wall, and his competitor is looking sideways at him. Now, some have said he was breathing, but regardless, the picture shows the competitor looking right at Michael Phelps, and Phelps crushes him. And to me, it's just a great metaphor of priorities and focus. So to me, priority one, when it comes to my work, is consistency, because I don't know how many emails I've received over the past 8.5 years that have said this exact thing. Clint, they said, every Sunday night after our family dinner, I'm washing the dishes, I listen to your podcast. Every Monday morning, I'm riding the train, commuting to work, I listen to your podcast. Every Monday morning, I go on a walk by myself, I listen to your podcast. What they're saying is, this is my routine. You've become part of my routine. That is how you build relationships. That's how you build trust. If you publish randomly, it can still go well. But to me, starting a platform with no name, completely independent, with no platform, I had no email list, I had no social media, literally zero social media following, nothing, out of the blue. This was one of the things that I could potentially differentiate myself, is by becoming a part of your routine, by consistently showing up for you, the listener. And if I do that, I can build trust. I can become part of your routine. So to me, I think that focus, by saying, no matter what, no matter how crazy the schedule gets, no matter how many speeches or how much air travel or whatever, I am not going to miss. And so my podcast producer, the guy who helps me, we text every single day, and we are now scheduled out for the next 8 weeks. Something catastrophic can happen. I do have a good bit of travel coming up. We have family stuff. We have everything. We're good for 2 months. If I don't record a single podcast, now I have, over the next 2 months, I probably have 10 to 12 podcasts already scheduled to make sure we stay way ahead of it. But that was a decision I made at the very beginning. I mean, I recorded 22 episodes before I released one. So that says I'm going to be 22 ahead of this thing, because I never wanted to miss. I never wanted to be inconsistent. Consistencies is something that I think is in my family DNA. I do see that from my parents. I definitely see that from my brothers. Definitely see that in myself. So I think that was just a big thing for me, which is no matter what, I'm going to do this thing. And I think that's just a choice. That's an intentional choice to make, because it's important to me. And I've learned over time that it seems to be important to the audience too. And so we're very aligned in that regard. And I think that's been helpful for the show's growth.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy what you're hearing so far and want me to be able to get your favorite guests on this show, please do me a quick favor. Subscribe to the show and leave me a rating. The 30 seconds of your time will mean a ton to me. And I'm going to share a quote you have from the book, or a section from the book, because I think it speaks to that. And it speaks to what's required in order to do that. And so what jumped out at me was a quote that you had from Chase Jarvis. It's ruthless discipline. There are no tricks. The focus part is what's wildly misunderstood. When you're focused on doing a thing and you do that thing relentlessly until you get the outcome you want, it's celebrated. No one else sees the other stuff. My best work has always come through discipline and focus. So I always say to excel, it's ruthless prioritization and discipline bordering on obsession. And there, I think I wrote last night, the downside to that, it can be burnout. But the upside to that is results that you can really be proud of. So what does that look like for you in prioritization and the discipline to always hit that? What are you saying no to say yes to? What are your tools for prioritizing every Sunday? I'm pressing go.
The saying no part is critical, because you start having to say no to really cool things or really great opportunities.
Yes.
Traveling out of the country, giving a keynote somewhere that's going to take 3 days of time to get there, to get to do it, to get home, whatever it may be. People wanting to partner or do something really that would be cool, but would take you away from kind of the daily work. And so I'm not great at this. I think I'm getting better at it, though, of just saying, no, I'm not doing that. And somebody says, hey, I love your stuff. I'm the coach of this golf team. It's a 5-hour drive, so you still don't have to fly, but you come talk to us and do this. I was like, that sounds cool, but I can't do that. I have this, and this, or I'm recording the podcast. So to me, it helps. I don't know how it is for you, of like, what's your number one thing? I've kind of built this chart, or I actually drew it out. And at the very middle, the foundation of all of the branches and all of the cool things I do is my podcast, because it's what leads to pretty much all of the cool stuff in my life, work-wise. So that's there. And then there's branches, but even the visual of knowing this has to be number one. That may change, I guess, at some point, because yes, having books actually becomes another mode of having people become aware of your work. And if that happens, then maybe that could lead back to the podcast or whatever, or it could lead to work or a speech or whatever. So it's knowing that this is the reason for everything and staying true to that. It helps that it intersects with the fact that it's my favorite thing to do. So it is nice that the thing that provides the most for me is also my favorite thing to do. Again, the reward for great work is the ability to do more. So that's what it is. Now, I do need to make money. And so there are elements of my work that I say yes to in order to make money. Writing books, speeches are a good way to do that. And then I host leadership circles. I work with leaders one-on-one. I do group leadership development things. So there are things I do need to do in order to keep doing the work that I love. But I try to limit the stuff that is like, oh, those days where like, oh gosh, I got to do this thing. I try to limit the amount of that. There's still some of that. There's no job in existence where there isn't some of that. I'm just trying to limit 100%. It. And the cool thing is, the more the show grows, the more the books do well, the better I speak on stage, demand increases a lot. And so when the demand increases, like simple economics, you can be much more picky on what you decide to do. So I'm very picky and intentional now with the clients I work with. They know this. Obviously, your leverage, your pricing goes way up. And then you can I prefer to have like fewer, better clients. So that takes like the time I'm working on it, it's enjoyable. Like you become a real partner with them, but it's not overtaking your day. You're not on airplanes all the time. And so then I remember how they became acquainted with me and my work, and I'm still focused on doing that well. There are moments in time with the podcast where I have not done enough preparation and it shows. I usually don't release those episodes, but I get pretty upset with myself and say, what am I doing? Like I get to do the coolest thing in the world. Why did you not prepare? Right. That's probably because I said yes too much to other things. And it's just a good way to put yourself in check and get back to remember what's the fundamental thing that is the reason that all of this cool career got started.
And when you talked about that, something that really jumped out, it sounds to me like you've realized what your flywheel is. And your flywheel is driven off the podcast, and all of these other avenues are what grow because of it. And then at some point they also start to feed it.
Mhm.
Being if you're writing books, if you're giving speeches, people are going to come to the podcast. It's going to continue to grow, which will give you an opportunity to do more speeches and to have more clients. So you've built your flywheel. And the key, though, is at the center of that flywheel is what you love. And
Mhm.
so people want to be motivated, they want the passion, but all of that tends to be fleeting. What you've done is build at the center. This is what I love. And that is hard to lose energy for. How important is it for people to put something they love at the center of what they want to pursue?
It depends because loving it's not enough. You also have to be, to quote Steve Martin or Cal Newport, you have to be so good at that thing that they can't ignore you. And so there are people doing things they love that the industry or the marketplace would say, hey, good for you, but I'm not paying you, right? Unless you don't need to make money, which there are some people like that. I'm not in that bucket. I need to make money. So I think it's a combination of doing the thing you love and continually getting better and better and better. If you love it, the chances of you getting better go up. And then the market is the ultimate arbiter to say, is this good enough or not? Because what happened when I had a full-time job, so that's why it was cool initially for 3 years, I had a full-time job. I didn't have to worry about the market telling me they wanted to pay me. What happened though was specifically with keynote speaking and some of the one-on-one stuff, the demand for that went up to the amount that I was out of PTO. I was out of paid time off days. And people might post it on LinkedIn and other places that those could see where I'm on a stage. And then in some people's eyes, it became a distraction. Well, it's the reason I left to do it full time and launch my own business is the market had told me enough times, there's something here. There's something here. The thing you love also is valuable enough in the marketplace that we will pay you. Because I do talk to people more and more now. Actually, I get more of these where they say, hey, I love this. Like, I want to work with people on mental health or something. I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. Well, have you proven that the market values what you do? And the only way is like, yeah, people tell me how good it is. I'm like, have they paid you? If they haven't paid you, no. It's completely different for a friend or even a random person. Oh, yeah, it's great. And then writing a check. So, yes, this is kind of more, I'm not trying to be like, push people away from doing what they love. I'm trying to help people find the intersection between what they love and what the market says is good enough that they'll write a check. Because unless you don't need to make money, maybe for some, it should always remain on the side. And I don't think there's, Austin Kleon writes about this all the time. I don't think there is anything wrong with that. In fact, I think it's awesome if it does, because sometimes making your passion, your love, a business can make it not your passion and your love. I'm very I know that those stories exist. I don't want that to happen for myself. So in a way, you have to just kind of make that call for yourself. Like, do I want this to become my main thing, or am I okay and even like the fact that I don't need to make money at it?
And Ryan, when you're describing it that way, it sounds to me almost like the Japanese concept of ikigai, where we're looking for
Yep.
that intersection of what do I love? What am I good at? What does the world need? And the key, what will people pay me for? And
Right.
when you find that intersection, and you can't really find it until you've ticked that box of I've become good at it. So when you
Yep.
look back at your journey, because it feels a lot like you've found your ikigai and are living it, 3 years, when you started, was the plan that you would eventually be there, or was it something you were doing out of passion on the side? And then at some part in that journey, you realized, well, wait a second, the thing has become the thing. What was that like for you on your journey?
I loved my job. I loved my team. I love the people I worked with. I love the company. zero intention to leave, literally none. I think I got asked to give my first speech probably like 10 months into my podcast. They paid me $500. I thought that was a lot. I spent $700 on the video team for that speech because all these speakers were saying, you got to have video, got to have video. So I mean, I lost money, but it was worth it. I watched the speech. It was horrendous. But like, it went out and did it. What happened though is more and more, the market was telling me, we want this, right? And then the rate starts going up and up and up and up and up. More opportunities create the ability to be a little bit more picky. So really, I just kind of listened to what the market was saying, combined with the fact that it did start to be a little bit of distraction for some of the leaders within the company. And my thought was, I don't know if you think this way, but I was like, I could always get a job in sales. I know I can. Maybe not this job that I'm at now, like this really high level, awesome job with these great people, but I bet I can get a job in sales. But doing the other thing where you're going to go out and podcast full time and speak and advise and consult, write books, I probably need 100% of my effort and my focus in order to write great books, in order to be even better at my podcast, in order, especially speaking on stage, which is really hard to get good at it. Like I hired coaches. I still work with coaches. I still go over everything when it comes to the visuals that we use. I still run through bits constantly with people who are far wiser than me because it's so hard to be good at that. Doing that on the side when you have a demanding job where you have leaders who are reporting to you and they have individual contributors reporting to them, I think what would have ended up happening if I would have continued on that path is I probably would have been average to good at both of them and would have sacrificed being great at one of them. And to me, I am grateful that I didn't have to make any money. I'm grateful that I got to follow it as a pure passion and pure fun for that amount of time, but it's probably not sustainable long term to be excellent at both, especially if you're using up all your PTO to go do these things. And during the day, you're constantly meeting with people. When you have a big corporate job like that, your calendar is crushed, man. It's tough. There's not a lot of time to think. There's not a ton of time to prepare. It really cuts into family time. It cuts into sleep. It cuts into a lot of things that are not good. So I don't know how sustainable it is long term. But at the beginning for me, no, it was purely just to learn. And I thought it would be cool if I could build a little bit of community around being a learning leader, because my favorite leaders in the world are those who are constantly learning, striving to get better and improve. And that's how I would define a learning leader.
Yeah, we're definitely going to dive into that one. And you've accurately described everything I'm realizing is I don't believe that the things that I'm doing can have a negative impact at work. That I've been doing for 23 years. My ability to do it is only improving through the podcast, to your point. The podcast, though, and the writing and the content creation cannot improve as much as I would like while working. Because the ability to put the amount of reps and the amount of time and the amount of investment into it.
Like when do you work on your threads? When do you write? Yeah, when do you write? When do you work on your threads? How do you stay consistent with that?
Everything you just said is nailed it.
Yeah.
And for me, what I do for a lot of my writing is I write when I'm not writing. And so what that looks like, I had Juliet and Kelly started on the show and for their book Built to Move. And that really lit a bit of a fire. So I've been walking about 15,000 plus steps a day. A lot of it's rucking. So I'll take my dog for a 90-minute walk. And while I walk, I'll listen to a podcast. And for a portion of the walk, I'll put the headphones in the pocket. And while I'm walking, I write the threads in my head, or I write my newsletter in my head. And then when I get back home, I'll just sit in front of the keyboard and start jamming away on what I wrote. And so I do a lot of my thinking visually, or if I'm driving, and this may be a bad one, I'm driving my kids to and from sports. The whole time I'm driving, I'm just noodling a thread idea. What's the hook going to be? Once you get the hook, and then I'll come up with, well, what are the titles of each of the threads? And so I'm just thinking it through. Okay, today I'm going to write about the flywheel. What is a flywheel? What's a good catchy hook for a flywheel? Okay, what are the 4 or 5 points I want to hit on for the flywheel? So I'll brainstorm that while I'm just going about my day. And that way, when I sit at the keyboard, I've thought it through and I have the plan on what I am going to write. And so it's not as formulaic as I would like to become. It's not the content engine or systems and Notion files and the roadmap of I'm going to write the newsletter. The newsletter will lead to a long form video, which will lead to 2 threads, which will lead to 4 individual tweets. It's not that yet. That's what it will become. But to have that is, to your point, you need the time. You need to have the dedicated hours to put into it. And right now that's not there.
How are you as a note taker? Like when you're on that walk, do you pause and like write it in your phone? Do you voice memo? Like I know you talked to Tiago Forte probably about some of this. Like how do you not forget the stories or the ideas?
I've realized over time I have a reasonably decent memory. And so if I say it enough times in my head, it's just in there. And I don't take copious notes on it. Where I've started to implement Tiago's work is in reading books. So putting a resource file together and keeping notes on that book that I can then go back to when I want to write something on that book. But on those walks, I rarely will take notes. If there is something that I'm not noodling enough, so I just an inspiration, then what I might do is I have a channel with my wife in WhatsApp for the growth guide, because yesterday was her last day. So now she's working on this full time with me.
Wow, cool.
So I'll just message her and say, write about this. And so she'll just make a note. Hey, here's a topic you want to write about. And so that will give me the inspiration that I'll come back to. And then I'll put it through the noodling process of really just, I guess, the brain just incubating it on those walks, just thinking it through, letting it tumble.
Book note-taking process then?
I use ClickUp.
Okay.
And what I'll do is as I go through the book, I'll just the key information that's new that isn't something that you already know. For example, if I'm reading The Pursuit of Excellence, when I see the flywheel, it's definitely something I want to talk to you about on the show, but I won't need to take that note and ClickUp because the flywheel is something that has been on my list for a dozen years, let's say. So I won't need to take that note. What I'll take is what are the notes that are things that I wasn't already aware of. And this comes back to what you talk about early in the book, this concept of thinking and rethinking. So I thought this, now I think this, because I need to continuously be learning and adapting. And so I'm not trying to capture what I already know, because that's not adding value to the growth. What's adding value is, oh, that's a concept I didn't know. And for example, the wall. Oh, okay. Yeah, I knew about focus and discipline, but this idea of the wall and being able to conjure that image when I'm having a conversation with someone, because those are the things that I'm assuming you love in doing the podcast and giving speeches and having conversations with people, is when you have those metaphors that you can pull out and give to someone. It really emphasizes that point. So I can talk about focus and discipline, but now to be able to say, let me give you an example with Michael Phelps and the wall. And people are like, the wall? They just give you that, oh, here comes a story. So that I want to write down and I want to capture, because I can use that later. And so that's generally the process there. And if we take that for people, we just brought up this idea of thinking and rethinking. What does that look like for you on your journey, and how can the listeners use that concept in their pursuit of excellence?
So I would say one of the biggest changes over the past 8.5 years for me is I think I've become more reasonable. I talked about this with Paulina Pompliano, and she writes about, she does a similar thing, but does it in written form, where she's studying people who have sustained excellence over time and trying to deconstruct their excellence and understand the behaviors of those people, the mindsets, the way they show up in the world. What I mean by more reasonable is I think I was quite judgmental growing up and earlier on and years ago. And then you talk to people for a living and you realize that everyone has a unique set of life experiences, a unique way they view the world, and for a specific reason. And instead of living in the black and white, which is where I think I've lived a lot, or it's either A or B, is you become more reasonable, realizing that the world is just very gray and very messy. So instead
Yes.
of judging somebody for anything that they do, why not approach them with more curiosity? There's a spectrum. On one end is being judgmental, on one end it's being curious. And I think what the podcast has done more than anything that I'm grateful for is it's taken me from being way over here, quite a judgmental person, and closer to the other end of being a more curious person. Even if someone, for example, I had Maurice Claret, a great football player at Ohio State, got drafted, could have been a Pro Bowler every year, could have went to the Hall of Fame. He was very, very talented. And Maurice got in trouble for driving drunk and having guns in his car and made some really horrible choices when he was in the pros, and it eventually ended his career. And I judged him for that. I'm like, man, what an idiot. He threw it all away. How stupid could he be? Until I talked to him and I learned about his upbringing, and I learned about the fact of, hey, I take for granted almost that I had great parents who taught me what I should do and what I shouldn't do. Maurice didn't have that. Didn't have a dad. His upbringing was dramatically different. He didn't have money. Why was he selling drugs? Because he wanted to eat. Now, does it mean you should break the law and make bad choices? No. Maurice will be the first one to tell you that he should not have done those things. But instead of just immediately judging him for selling drugs or riding with all these guns or driving drunk, right? Things that he broke the law and he served his time and he should, right? But instead of just immediately judging people, I got more curious about his story. I got more curious, like, oh, yeah, I understand you don't know how to manage money, or that you didn't have the same upbringing I had. Why not be more curious about people and less judgmental? Why not realize that the world is very messy? People are messy. It's very gray. It's not black and white. And so I think so many experiences now, over 550 of these conversations, has helped me become more reasonable, helped me become less judgmental. I think from a leadership perspective, that's a good thing. Just from a living perspective, that's a good thing. And I try to share that message with people who maybe were like on that spectrum, are living closer to being more judgmental, because I think it opens you up to so many amazing opportunities and potential relationships if you approach people with curiosity instead of judgment. Who likes when you walk up to somebody and you have a conversation, you can tell they're judging you and they're judgmental, and the way they talk negatively about other people behind their back, they're judging them. What do, Clint? Like, you're like, I'm going to go over here, right? I'm going to steer clear, versus the person who approaches you with curiosity, who speaks kindly behind the backs of others, who says like, wow, did you see what they did? This, oh my God, that's like Clint's 330,000 followers on Twitter. How did he do it? What have you learned? Like, whatever the thing is, right? Those people then open themselves up to potentially, wanting to have a relationship with them. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, having deep, meaningful relationships with people is kind of what life's all about. So I just want to create the space, the container for those opportunities to exist. And it's not going to happen being judgmental. It's not going to happen speaking negatively behind people's backs. It has a better chance of happening if I'm more reasonable and if I'm less judgmental. So I think the podcast has really made me rethink and change how I approach people over the past almost decade now. And that's one of the things I think about the most.
And some things to chew on in there. One of them that jumps out at me right now is we're seeing that scenario you talked about play out right now in the media with John Morant. I
Yeah.
don't know what's happening in his life. It's easy to say, well, what a bonehead. He shouldn't be doing this. He's a celebrity. He's an athlete. He's making all these mistakes. But what I'm not seeing in the national narrative is, well, let's pull back and let's ask ourselves, what's happening in his life? What's happened in his past? What's informed the decisions he's making today? And to your point, approaching what he's going through from a place of curiosity versus indicting the guy. And that doesn't seem like the right answer. There's clearly something deeper at play that should be explored. And it doesn't mean what he's doing is right. It doesn't mean there shouldn't be repercussions. But how do we get underneath the cover and help the guy, not just vilify and punish?
Again, it doesn't excuse poor behavior. We're not doing that, but it is say like, let's wonder why. I mean, Liz Weissman actually said this to me on my podcast when I was complaining about. I was getting a lot of emails about people saying like, I'm all into growth and getting better and improving, but I work for a terrible boss. And one of the things she said to me was, well, what if you just ask the question, like, I wonder why? I wonder why. I wonder why they are that way. It doesn't mean like it's going to fix it or make them a better boss, but it may make you approach them again with more curiosity and less judgment. And maybe when you're during your interactions with them, you will approach them that way. And who knows what could happen? It might not make it better. They may not become all of a sudden overnight a great boss, but I guarantee you the odds of it getting better increase if you approach them that way versus saying, this person sucks. I don't want to be with them. I hate them. When you show up for them, how do you think you're going to show up in that room when you talk to them? If that's what you're thinking subconsciously, if that's what you're thinking privately, if that's what you're talking to your partner about, right? And I've been that person, and it doesn't, the chances of it getting better are basically zero versus saying, I wonder why. Now, I'm not saying be a doormat or get walked over, any of those things. I'm just saying approach people with more curiosity and less judgment. Let's see what happens. I think the odds of it going better increase if you approach them in that way.
And the other thing that happens when you're curious that you touched on, so if we pull back and look at broader society, there's so much of this, well, there's a fence in the middle and I'm on this side and they're on that side, and I have to be on the opposite side of them, whoever they are, on every single issue, which seems odd to me. It would seem that there are some things we can just agree on. When you look at that, it always brings up the quote for me. I believe it was John Maynard Keynes who said, when the facts change, I change my mind.
Yeah.
What do you do in your journey? You're looking to learn, you're looking to rethink, you're looking to be curious. I'm assuming somewhere along that journey, you change your mind on a lot of things. And your listeners may say, well, Ryan, you're a flip-flopper. Like, you used to think this, now you think this. How do you respond to that as you've learned on your journey, and you have probably changed your mind on a lot of different things?
Well, I mean, Abraham Lincoln was for slavery at one point in his life, changed his mind, right? Facts, he understood, he learned, he educated himself, he changed his mind. Is he a flip-flopper? I doubt that phrase is used with him. It's a fact. I mean, it's part of it. If you study, I think, the history's greatest leaders and greatest thinkers, they're constantly updating and evolving and getting better. They have an open mind. It doesn't mean you don't have conviction, or it doesn't mean you don't have courage to stand up for what you believe in. It means you have the willingness to rethink things and to update your thinking when better evidence presents itself. And so that's what when I say on my show is this is what I think right now. This is what I think as of today, based on the evidence, based on everything I've learned. This is what I believe. But if better evidence presents itself, I will definitely update my thinking and change my thoughts, change my mind on that. I think that should be rewarded. That should be something that we strive for. It doesn't mean it happens all the time. It doesn't mean, like, there are flip-floppers. I understand what you mean. Like, I think it gets a bad name because there are politicians who, and not just politicians, it happens in the corporate world too, who they don't even know what they believe in. They don't even take the time to do the necessary work to know what their core values are, to know how they want to show up. They simply want, in some cases, they want power. And they'll do whatever it takes to get power. So whatever the polls say, this is what I need to be, that's what they do. And I use polls because in the political landscape, right, they're constantly polling. And then there are politicians who just base whatever they're going to say at their stump speech based on what the polls say. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, like, you're actually doing the work to be a thoughtful and reflective person. And then when you say something, you say it with intention and belief and evidence behind it, not just saying, well, what do they want? Oh, they want this. Well, I guess I'm going to go for that now. That's why it gets a bad rap. And I agree with people who give that a bad rap. I'm talking about, hey, there are things in the world where you're going to update what you think and what you believe. And when you do, when the evidence presents itself, then share it and share why you're changing or why you're updating it. I think that's important.
And something you said right there, I believe it was Charlie Munger who talks about this a lot, is doing the work to support what you believe in, which can often mean you understand the opposite viewpoint
Right.
as much or more than you do your viewpoint. What does that look like for you in your journey? And how can our listeners apply that to their lives to become more intellectually rigorous, I would say?
I don't love getting into politics, and so I won't like share details,
Yeah,
but
it doesn't have to be
I,
politics. It could
but,
be
but,
fitness or whatever it is.
well, I mean, fitness guy, that stuff's changing all the time, right? We use, hey, keep your metabolism going, so eat 8 meals a day so that metabolism runs. Now I'm intermittent fasting all the time. And I told my wife, I'm like, hey, we intermittent fast now, and there's going to be studies that come out 2 years from now. Intermittent fasting is horrible, whatever. So that's one thing. But with the political thing, I think this has, it's more broad than just that. I think it's important to have a friend group, a peer group of people who are all across that spectrum. We may not agree, and there are times when we definitely do not agree. But it is helpful to understand where they're coming from and why. And it's helpful that we can still love each other. We still give each other hugs. We still text. We still do it all, even though we disagree and maybe we'll never agree on certain things. I think that's healthy. I think that's a good thing. As much as there are moments when I get upset with them or I'm like, how do you really, like, how is that possible? It still is better to have those friendships and those conversations than just being in your little bubble with the people who only think exactly what you think. I think we have to regularly expose ourselves to people who do think differently from us, ask them questions, be curious. You may find, even if you still disagree with what they believe, you could better understand why they believe it. And I think that's a really good thing. I think that's something we all probably need more of. And it seems in this world where it is divisive at times, where there is division, like my camp or your camp, if you believe this, blah, blah, blah. It is really good to be in a room. I was at a small group dinner. It was one I was hosting a couple weeks ago in Columbus. And there was two people, both guys I love, very bright, both business owners. They do very well for themselves. One of them, I'll just say his name, one of them loves Jordan Peterson and one of them hates him. And they both shared why, and they both respectfully listened to why they loved him and why they didn't and what he did. And at the end of the dinner, they shook hands, gave each other like a half hug and said, I love that we could talk about that. They didn't agree on Jordan Peterson, but one of them loved him and one of them didn't. And I was sitting kind of like front row seat and I didn't say a word, just observed. And to me, I was proud. Both these guys who are part of my leadership circles, who are good dudes, that they respectfully, completely disagreed about something, shared why, and I bet opened each other's minds a little bit. And then at the end of the conversation, shook hands and gave each other a half hug, like, I like that guy. And they both independently sent me a text about, like, I love that we could have that type of conversation. Like, that's like high rung thinking that Tim Urban would write about. And so I think that's important. I just think it's important for us to try to get ourselves in positions and situations where we can have conversations like that.
And I always look at that, Ryan, is having those people or in an organization, leaders, having friends in a circle that will push, challenge, and support you. If they're doing all three of those things, you've really found people that will help you on your journey. You talk about this concept of, and I might have the pronunciation wrong, having a junto on your pursuit of excellence. What is a junto and what does that look like when you're building one for yourself?
I've heard it pronounced both junto and junto, the Benjamin Franklin, right? It's the gathering of people to bring ideas and share. Originally, when they formed them, it was you were to show up, and usually it was like tradesmen and people would show up and they would actually write and they would read what they had written about any type of philosophy or political element, any topic at all, and they would share what they believe with the group and have then constructive dialogue amongst people. And oftentimes there would be disagreements, but the purpose of the junto was that we set a container up, a space for us to have constructive dialogue. And I think that is, I mean, this is literally when I built my leadership circles, it was around, I studied these so much because I wanted to create these for myself. And that's why I have members from all over the world, all different industries, all different levels of experience. But then we all do the same curriculum and show up with the same pre-work and have the same share our ideas about certain topics. And oftentimes we don't all agree. And I think that's great. the concept of your who was said to me on episode 216 of my show by Jim Collins. I'll never forget it, when I was rambling on and on, kind of like I am with you from time to time, but rambling on and on excitedly about what I was doing and why I was doing it and how I was going about building this business, all this stuff. And Jim's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Chill out, dude. The single greatest determining factor in your long-term success or failure will be your who. Who will be your friends? Who will be your spouse? Who will be your partner? Who will be your mentors? Who will you teach? Who will you spend the most time around? That is who you will become. And so, again, we talked about earlier in the conversation about manufacturing hardship for kids. I was trying to manufacture community. I'm trying to create juntos for people who don't have this in their lives. I actually offer this. This is an offering that's become one of the biggest parts of my business. Now, I form the groups, I do all the interviews, I create the curriculum, I facilitate all the meetings. We meet in person sometimes. We do a lot of it on Zoom. That is a missing element in a lot of leaders' lives. Leadership is lonely. They get promoted or they have their own business and they don't have people they can go to. They don't have a safe place where they can actually share what they're thinking and what they believe and get constructive feedback and dialogue. They ask questions, right? It is an obvious need. The applications for this are far more than I can do. I'm having to, the next step in my business is having more people who are going to run and facilitate leadership circles. People want this. They need it. And they don't have, there's not enough of it. And so that from Benjamin Franklin, I think is as needed and as wanted more now today than it ever has been.
Which is so interesting in that we're in this world that's hyper connected, yet we're also so alone. And how do we bridge that divide? So this is a beautiful way to do that. And on the topics in the book, I could probably talk to you for days, but I do want to respect your time on that. So a last question I'll throw at you on the book before diving into Final Four, if we have a few minutes, Ryan, is you talk about the pursuit of excellence being a lifelong journey. And two concepts that you talk about are good fortune of knowing nothing and personal mastery. What do those look like for you on your journey? And what should our listener be thinking about when they're looking at, I want to grow and I want to pursue excellence for the rest of my life?
Sometimes if you know how hard something's going to be, you won't do it. Often I share this at the beginning because like launching a new podcast, it's crowded. It takes so much time if you want to do it well. It sound like people think it's easy, but it's actually really hard to do it well. If you do it great, you make it look easy. And so being naive, not realizing how hard it would be, helped me. It was very helpful because the hardest part is saying, yes, I'm going to do it, is committing to recording 22 times before you launch, is not realizing that you kind of sound like an idiot at the beginning and you don't know what you're doing. Like being naive to all of that, of not knowing that, was helpful, because if I would have known all of that, if I would have thought I sounded stupid, if I realized how tough it is to consistently ship it every Sunday, I don't know if I would have done it. I just followed my curiosity with great rigor, as Brian Koppelman says, and doing that led to what it became. And so sometimes I just think it's almost better to be, I hear about like Dustin Johnson talk about this with golf. Like he's like, I'm just not really thinking. I just figure out the distance and then I get to pull the club and I hit it. And in a way, there's some beauty in that. Like I'm a thoughtful and reflective person. It's a core value of mine. However, there is some luck maybe involved with not knowing everything. And if you don't, if you knew too much, you might not do it. And in my case, I think that's absolutely true for the beginning. Now, the momentum has already been started. It's like James Clear writes about in Atomic Habits. Like sometimes the hardest part of the run is lacing up your shoes. Once you're running, you just keep running, versus like starting is hard. Like what's the heaviest weight in the gym? It's the front door. And I think think about these things like that plays a role in everything. So sometimes not realizing how heavy that thing is, you're like, well, I'm just going to try to go, can be a good thing. So to me, that's really where that all stems from, is I'm grateful in a way that I was naive to a lot of this stuff.
I love that as a way to wrap up the pursuit of excellence. Do you have a few minutes for a Final Four rapid fire questions?
Mm-hmm.
All right. What's one book that has had a significant influence on your life out of all the many books you've read?
The Wright Brothers by David McCullough. I live in Dayton, Ohio. That's where the Wright Brothers lived. That's where they grew up. Their bicycle shop is like 15 minutes down the street. That's where they were tinkering and starting to think about creating the first ever flying machine. I learned a lot from that book because it's beautifully written by David McCullough. He's a master storyteller. And those guys really followed their curiosity with great rigor. That's what they did against amazing odds, against others who were far, far better funded than they were. And yet they just kept going. They kept showing up. And then they go down to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and they would stand on the sand dunes and watch birds. And eventually they would try to get that thing flying. To me, there's so many good stories and metaphors in that for life. I think it's the ultimate leadership book. I think it's the ultimate book of personal growth, of the pursuit of excellence, of following your curiosities. I just think there's so many key learnings. I love biographies, and that's been at the top of my list for quite some time now.
Yeah, and the way you talked in the book about them sketching the different wing shapes and where the hawk was when it was doing X, or this bird as it was moving up, and how none of them did Y when there was a draft or no draft. It was powerful imagery. So I imagine that would have been beautiful in the original one as well. And what's on your shelf right now? What are you taking down at the moment?
I've been reading McRaven's latest one, The Wisdom of the Bullfrog. I don't know if you read that one yet. I think Admiral William McRaven, I had on my show a couple years ago, the leader in charge of the Bin Laden raid. I've been deep into that book because, one, I like kind of the manner. He just titles each chapter with like a core saying or concept or belief, and then tells stories around it. And from writing books, and you probably know, Twitter actually probably makes you better at this. If you're not careful, you will add fluff to your book if you're not careful. And tweets kind of don't allow you to do that. There's power in the constraints of the character limits, especially if I know they've kind of undone some of that. I think that might be a mistake, but I think
Agreed.
The constraints are a good thing. I think McRaven is one of the best at saying, what are the fewest number of words I could put in this book to tell these amazing stories? And then he somehow does it. This is the constant process with my writing where it's like, God, dude, there's too many words. Like, we need to get our point across better. And the people who do it well, they make it look easy, right? But it's actually really hard. It's really hard. So I don't know, maybe I can talk to you about that offline later about maybe Twitter would help with that. But I admire a guy like him. There are others, but I admire a guy like him who really gets the point across. And then there's not another single word beyond what's needed to be in there in order to get that point across.
Yeah, I believe that you're absolutely right on Twitter as a resource for doing that, because you often have to take complex topics and boil them down into 280 words or characters, sorry. How do I get that idea across in 280 characters? And it really forces you to refine and pull out any filler words.
It's probably why I'm not very good on Twitter, honestly. I mean, I don't focus on it.
It just takes practice.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. I don't focus on it. I don't even, but at times when I'm doing like, this isn't that good, it's like, it's probably why. Maybe that should be like a commitment. I don't know. I've thought about that, but again, I'm also trying to get better at being focused and saying no. So that's like the honestly, man, maybe we'll talk about it later, but that is something that I think about a lot. Is like, getting better at it would serve multiple masters. One, it will grow your social reach, but two, it'll probably make you a better writer. And so it's not just about growing your following. It's about using a tool to become more skillful at something that is so important, which is becoming an effective writer.
My general view has been that it helps in multiple areas. So one, yes, absolutely, being a better writer on that platform allows me to be a better writer overall. So if anything, on my newsletter, I feel like I have to add, because it's a little too tight. I can't just repurpose a thread. I have to actually put some meat on the bones. The other thing it does is, in your public speaking or in your conversations, your ability to convey ideas in a very tight answer increases. I tend to give very long, rambling answers. And I would say that they've reduced in length and have a level of brevity that gets the same or even more meaningful a point across in a tighter response. So it's playing double duty. And I think that comes down to so many people say that our writing improves our thinking. If you can convey ideas in few words, to do that, you have to be able to think that way, which translates to better speaking.
I mean,
And so I
writing
can't
is
tell.
yeah. I just think it's the ultimate tool to create clarity of thought. I don't
100%.
fully know what I think about something until I write about it. And I think being clear on what you believe and what you think is an important skill for definitely for leaders, but for all people. And so that's why I push them all to have some sort of writing practice, whether they're going to publish or not. Because I would imagine you don't fully know about fully what you think and believe about the topic until you sit down to write about it.
And you can't defend it until you
Right.
actually start to, well, let's look at this from different angles. And the hard part for you and for me is how much of the writing has improved my public speaking or your public speaking versus the fact that we're also speaking on the podcast. So it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
tell how much each has improved or what's the driver. Is the public speaking improving simply because we're having these conversations with people week in, week out, day in, day out, or because of the clarity of our writing? Or is it a combination of the two? And I think it is that combination.
Probably. I mean, I think speaking is such a repetition game and writing is too. So doing both of them, they're both forms of communication. So they're both hopefully making us better communicators. So whether you're speaking on a stage, having a conversation with a thoughtful person, or writing, all of those combined are all you exercising the communication muscle. And by regularly exercising it should get better versus those who are not regularly exercising that, which there are some who their only form of writing is maybe emails or emails at work, and they're not reading a lot, and they don't give presentations or speeches. They're not recording a podcast. Well, think about where you're going to be versus where that person whose only form of writing and reading are emails, which unfortunately are probably a lot of people where they're not really reading books, they're reading emails and they're responding to them. Whereas you are giving talks and talking with wise people and writing all the time outside of emails. That's over time. I mean, you're going to be in completely different spots. You're going to be here, they're going to be, and you're going to be going like this, and they're going to be going like this. I mean,
And Twitter improves your emails. We need more
sure.
people to learn how to write tweets so that we don't have to read so many bad emails, Ryan. What's the one thing you've spent less than $1,000 on that has, in the last, let's say, 12 months, that you look back and say, wow, I wish Ryan had bought that earlier?
Man, I should have thought about this one before. Less than $1,000 on that's made a big difference. I don't know. I mean, I probably could have a better answer if I think about this more, but it's probably like headphones or something along those lines to help me focus. But that's not really a good answer. So I wish I had a better answer for you for that one, but I have to think about that more. What about you? Is there something that on your list maybe it'll jog my memory?
I mean, for me, it would probably be, yeah, it's going to tie to podcast equipment. So now that we're doing the show on, and I'd have to double check if it's under $1,000. It's going to be close to that. I have a teleprompter in front of me, so I can have a conversation with you, and I'm making eye contact throughout the conversation while, because I'm looking into the camera while having the conversation with you, instead of, normally before this, I would have been on my laptop and I'm looking down talking to you on the laptop, and just the view's off. So having that teleprompter allows me to have it feels like I'm much more engaged in the conversation with you, and at the video will show me looking straight at the listener. So I've found that a really cool little tool that my wife picked out as she starts to build out a YouTube studio, which is it's just a whole other ball game to learn. So it's going to be fun.
That's awesome. I love it.
And I'm really eyeing that mic you have. That's a beauty. So if that was in the last 12 months, It shows
Yeah.
it shows
I
up
can
really well.
send you the link. I've tried pretty much everything. I've tried them all. I like this one. I like how it seems to sound when we release episodes. There are others like it, but yeah, I think it's worth it to, if you're going to have a podcast and you're going to be on video, have the good camera, have the good mics, make sure you like try to look and sound as good as possible. And obviously the content's everything, but don't ruin it by having poor audio or poor visuals with it, especially if you're going to be on video. Do you publish the videos?
Starting now. So
Cool.
we started that a couple episodes, so that's brand new, and that's the
Nice.
next step we're working on. And there's synchronicities in life, Ryan. Our tenant just gave notice a week ago, so they'll be moving out July 1st. So we've decided we're going to turn the basement suite into a YouTube podcast studio. So
Nice, dude.
all of this will change with time. Last question, and I'm sorry, I know I'm going over, is because the show is about growth, which ties to the idea of excellence. What's one habit, mindset shift, or behavior change that has had a dramatic impact on your life?
We probably mentioned it earlier on. I just wasn't fully aware when I was a little bit younger on the benefit. There'll be two things. The benefit, one, of if you actually deeply read books and try to apply your key learnings to your life. That's one. And then one book will usually lead to the next and the next and the next. I just think, unfortunately, not enough people read. And two, the relationships that have been built through recording with somebody, which I hope happens for us, quite frankly, man, because I think there's a lot of interesting things about your story that I'd like to learn more about. But there are people who have been guests on my podcast that now are legitimate lifelong friends, where not only do we hang out socially and see each other when we're in each other's cities, but we're doing work together where maybe I need another person and I call on them and we do something together, or they do something where I am not able to go. And so in a way, like, we haven't become business partners, but kind of. I mean, we have. And so having long form conversations, like, how often do you have deep, long form, meaningful conversations with people off air? We probably don't do it enough. In fact, I think the podcast has helped me do that more. But these are kind of vulnerable, and they're longer than most conversations. You're actually talking as opposed to texting. So you have the ability to actually build relationships with people that go far beyond just recording a podcast. Not every time, but it definitely happens more than I would have ever expected. And to me, that's led to immense growth in my life, is just the building of these relationships with people who I really look up to. And it's cool to be able to have them as friends, to both meet with in person, to text regularly, and to sometimes do work together.
There's a definite power there, and I know it's something that, to your point, as I transition eventually to this being full time, is when you jump on a call and you have that type of conversation with someone, wanting to say, hey, the way you think, the way you talk, the way we dove into this topic, like, I'd love to just explore this with you off platform. And a person you mentioned earlier that jumps out at me like that is Brad Stulberg. When he's going to come on for his next book that's coming out later this year again. But having that conversation, it's similar to talking with you right now. I thought to myself, like, I could talk to you for a day or two nonstop, and it would be crazy to record that. But just the value that I would get out of it, the listeners would for sure get value. But you can't record for an entire day. So it's like, okay, well, how do we do that again? So I absolutely understand the value of that over time and see some beauty in that. We went pretty wide, pretty deep. Is there anything we didn't hit on the pursuit of excellence that you want to make sure the listener gets?
Yeah, you did a great job, man. It's obvious you read it and prepared. Thank you for that. But I think you did a great job. I mean, there's still plenty more, obviously, in the book, because that's how books are. But I thought you really hit the things that I could tell you're most curious about. So I just appreciate you and your work leading up to this. I know how that goes, and it's obvious that you did the work.
Yeah, and for the listeners, this was one of the, take a step back. I think you were hard on yourself earlier when you said about the fluff, because there was a lot of concepts in there, and it's not a giant book. So to be able to get that much good material and that many good ideas in that tight of a book, you did a very good job on the brevity and hitting a lot of points. So for the listeners, there's a ton to take away that you'll get out of this. That's the equivalent of reading 10 to 20 other books. So definitely it was great there, Ryan. I want people to dive into that. We'll have that in the show notes. Where can the listeners find you?
Learningleader.com is the home base of everything I do. My podcast is called The Learning Leader Show. If you're in podcast apps, you search my name, Ryan Hawk, or Learning Leader, it'll pop up. But that's really the home base. That's kind of the central point for everything else that I do.
Perfect. We will get all that in the show notes. And thank you for joining me today on The Growth Guide. That was a blast.
Thanks, Clint. Really appreciate it, man.
Cheers.
If you like the podcast, you'll love our new newsletter, The Growth Guide. Every Thursday, straight to your inbox, with the goal to help you be better, achieve more, and become financially free. Check it out at our website, thegrowth.guide. Subscribe and learn more.